Welcome, everyone. Good morning. My name is Rosie Tellez. I am the supervising coordinator for the Peer Self-Advocacy program. We welcome you to this webinar, Open Book Stories of Hope. My name is Rosie Tellez again. My visual description, I'm a Latina woman with curly dark hair, glasses, and the background would be an open book with a beacon of light coming out of the middle of it and letters saying, Open Book Stories of Hope. Today, we will have the panelists share their insightful stories with rich lived experience and their mental health recovery journeys. I'd like to introduce to you our first panelist, Jesse.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessie Gilbert. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm a white person with short blonde hair, and today I'm wearing a green sweater. My background is the open book background, and today I'm going to be presenting.
And we
Now I want
have
to
our
hand it off to Aurelia.
Thank you, Jesse. Hello, everyone. My name is Aurelia Sanchez. I'm a peer self-advocacy coordinator. My pronouns are she, her. My hair is long. I have it straightened today, so it's long and black. I have a blue dress with yellow flowers on them, and my background is of a grassy field. And I'm going to pass it on to Robin.
Thanks, Leah. Hi, I'm Robin. I'm with the Peer Self-Advocacy program. This is our team. Glad to be here. I'm a white woman. My pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing a black sweatshirt over a red turtleneck because I'm always cold. I have glasses and blonde hair, and I'll be one of the speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you, team. I'll just share a few logistics to our participants. We do have ASL interpreting and captioning available for you. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you're able to see your CC button. You can access your captions that way on your own settings on your computer or devices. Also, if you're joining us by phone, please mute your phone. Regarding the chat, that will not be available, yet there's a comment on there that you're welcome to access our agency, Disability Rights California, and some more information as how you can get some confidential help. Okay, without further ado, we'll go ahead and introduce our first panelist. Jesse?
Hello. Thank you, Rosie. So today I want to talk about a subject that is deeply personal to me, and that is my own recovery journey. Please be aware that in my presentation, I'm going to speak of death of a loved one. I'm going to speak of psychosis, suicidal ideation, and involuntary psychiatric commitment. So please listen with care. So in 2015, my father passed away. And that was before I had received my diagnosis. By mid-2016, I was in the midst of an intense episode that included psychotic symptoms. I had never experienced something like that before, so I didn't have any framework for what was happening to me. I knew that something was wrong, but at the time, I didn't have health insurance and I wasn't able to get the mental health care that I needed. By late 2016, I would be up for days on end, then a couple weeks later would stay in bed for a week or so at a time. I started avoiding situations and places that triggered my growing suicidal ideation. I quit my job due to paranoid delusions and eventually had to move back in with my mom. My mom helped me sign up for health insurance. Due to my symptoms, our relationship became very strained, and I left her home to live with some friends of mine. A friend of mine who is a social worker encouraged me to seek help, and in retrospect, she saved my life. I went to an emergency room, planning to get hooked up with mental health services, but within a couple of hours, I'd been placed on an involuntary hold. They didn't tell me that I was on the hold, of course. They just told me that I couldn't leave. There were no beds in any psychiatric units available, so I ended up staying in the emergency room for 2 out of the 3 days of my psych hold. Finally, I was transferred to a psychiatric facility. I didn't know anything about psychiatric holds. I didn't know how long I could be kept there. I didn't know what a patient's rights advocate was. I didn't know how to navigate the situation that I had been thrust into. And as a trans person, I found myself continually misgendered and put into situations that triggered my dysphoria. While I was on my hold, I attended groups, I took my meds, and eventually was released at the end of my third day of involuntary commitment. A few weeks later, I was diagnosed with bipolar type 1 with psychotic features. I had been placed on antipsychotics in the hospital and was still taking them after my release. I can remember the moment when my fixed delusion that had followed me for almost a year became unfixed, and I was able to understand what happened to me was going on in my brain and not in the world around me. I was homeless for about 6 months after I was hospitalized, though I was lucky to have friends open their homes to me, so I never had to be on the street. Eventually, I reconciled with my mother and moved back in with her. I had a part-time job, working only 1 day a week remotely for another 6 months after that. Eventually, I applied to a job working at an access organization for the deaf and hard of hearing community in Orange County. I was hired and moved out there. It took about a year after my hospitalization to be well enough to have a full-time job again. In retrospect, having a deep connection to the deaf community gave me incredibly powerful role models of people navigating a world not built for them, who live vibrant, meaningful lives. Because of my involvement in the deaf community, I already knew 3 things when I was diagnosed. I knew I wasn't broken. I knew that I was still a complete person worthy of love and respect. 2, I knew I had a community out there. I just didn't know them yet. And 3, I knew that I had rights. I knew about the Americans with Disabilities Act. I worked at that job for 2 years, was eventually laid off, and got hired at DRC. Joining this organization was a pivotal moment for me in my own understanding of my disability. I began to recognize it as a central part of my identity in a way that was empowering. A big part of my mental health recovery has been working to overcome the shame and guilt of what I put other people through when I was unwell. Getting this job has helped me to find community with people of common lived experience and helped me to recognize my own resilience. An aspect of my work that I am so grateful for is this: I get to be the person who empowers others with the information and tools they need to advocate for themselves and understand the circumstances that they find themselves in. I even had the opportunity to write a training which teaches service providers how to better serve clients who are trans and non-binary. About a year ago, when reflecting upon my journey, I wrote a poem that speaks to my experience. I'd like to read that for you now. This is called When You Recover. When you recover, your shame becomes a boulder on your back. Does it get smaller? No, but you get stronger. When you recover, there will be starlight and still people who choose to see you only for your darkest moments. Lovers, friends, and strangers will trade places in your life, and your footsteps will stretch across places you never thought you'd go. When you recover, your life will be a stone, oblong and flat, that you can skip across the river on a breezy day. Can you make it to the other side? When you recover, you will worship the moon and pray to Icarus. When you recover, there will be flowers buried in snow. Will you make of them a crown for your hair or a wreath for your grave? When you recover, there will be endings and beginnings, a closed door and an empty page, an uphill climb and breathtaking views, a refuge. Thank you for listening to my story and my poem. And next, I would like to invite my colleague, Aurelia Sanchez, to share her story.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for attending our webinar. Thank you so much, Jesse. I was listening to your story, it really touched my heart. I wanted to share a little bit about my mental health journey. Once again, my name is Aurelia Sanchez. I'm a peer self-advocacy coordinator here with Disability Rights. Pronouns are she, her, and I'm wearing a blue dress with yellow flowers on them. I was very honored to be asked to speak today, especially this month being Mental Health Awareness Month. I've had a very long journey, and I'm so happy to share this with you today. Um, when there is a lot of trauma, childhood trauma, so I'm going to just briefly touch on that. When I was a child, I was abused, and that started off on my journey where I did not know how to regulate my emotions because of all the trauma that I experienced. I remember experiencing a panic and anxiety attack at the age of 7 years old and not understanding why I was feeling this way. Um, as I got older and became a teenager, I remember I was full of anger and rage, and I didn't know where to direct that to because I didn't have an out. I didn't have any coping skills. I wasn't aware of resources and, even speaking to a therapist or a counselor, being Hispanic, growing up in a Hispanic household, it was very taboo to discuss any outside issues or problems that we've had, and it was like we brush it under the rug type of thing. Um, so I was growing up and I was just, you know, didn't have any out, didn't have any support. And when I became 18, I remember seeking help through a therapist. And I remember telling my mom that I was going to do this, and she became very angry. She was angry at me for speaking to an outsider about our issues or my issues. But it was something that needed to be done. This is where my journey began. And I remember when I was 19, I decided to start taking medication. I was taking Klonopin to help with my anxiety and my panic attacks. They used to get so bad that I wouldn't be able to leave my home. I wouldn't be able to interact with people. It was really affecting my overall life. So when I started taking Klonopin, I remember not even knowing how to take my medication properly. And one day I took many pills of Klonopin because I was experiencing such a bad panic and anxiety attack, and I wound up overdosing on the medication. And not only this, during this time, I was also self-harming. So I used to cut, my arms. I still have scars on my legs and my arms. And I overdosed and I called my mother. I didn't live with her at the time. And I'm so grateful to my mother. I feel like she saved my life that day because if I didn't call her, no one would have known. So she came and she took me to the hospital. And I remember waking up 2 days later at the 5150 unit here in India where I reside. And I was very scared. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know of any patient right advocate that I can speak to. I didn't have any support. I just remember being scared and fearful because I didn't know where I was at. And after that, I just decided that I really wanted to take control of my life, and I didn't want to let my diagnosis define me. So I decided to go back to school, and I obtained my associates. And shortly after I went to school and I continued on with my education, I was able to receive my bachelor's degree, which I was super proud of because if you know me then, everyone wouldn't have thought that I would have continued on with my education because I never liked school. So it was a huge surprise to my family and friends. But the main thing that I wanted to share was, through all of that, there was a lot of times where it didn't feel like there was any hope. So for me to be able to work for DRC in our peer self-advocacy program and being able to go out and share this with the trainings that I provide to the community, it brings me such joy and a passion to continue on and just continue to help others because I was at that place And I did want to bring up that I actually was able to conduct trainings at the same 5150 unit that I was in. And whenever I go and provide trainings there, I always share how I slept in those same beds, how I was in the same hospital, and able to provide that hope to others that are there now. And I've cried with the peers during my trainings because some people are just taken aback. They're like, "You were here," and I'm like, "Yes, I was here too." So there's hope. There's hope, and there's a lot of support here. And just know that you're gonna get through this, no matter what you think now. And it seems very hopeless, but it's not, because I was at that place at one time where I felt like I was done with everything and I just didn't want to live anymore. There was a lot of times when I felt that way. But I like to I love to emphasize DRC so much because I love what we do and I love how passionate my coworkers are. Even this morning, just talking about our background, what we were going to put on our background and how passionate my coworkers are. I love I love my coworkers so much because they're so passionate and I see it in the work that they do and the work that we do as a team. And I just wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So I just wanted to share that, my journey and how I'm not, I still struggle sometimes. And I think I'm always going to struggle, but I know now how to cope with it. I know that there's coping skills and there's resources and there's people that I can talk to, and I know how to regulate my emotions, and I know how to watch for myself, making sure I don't burn out. So this is everything that I've obtained through my journey. And I just feel I'm so grateful to be here. And I'm so happy that you all are joining us, and whatever hope that we can bring to you all, that's what drives me. This is the passion that I bring. And I just want to thank my coworkers. I love my coworkers. They're awesome. But thank you for inviting me, and I'm super stoked to be here. And I'm so honored to present my supervisor. She rocks, and that's Robin.
Thank you, Leah. Hi, everyone. That was a powerful story, Leah, and also Jesse. We all have had our unique journeys, and I think I'm going to be sharing mine is going to seem like a really long journey with many ups and downs and like a roller coaster. So my journey started, I was growing up in a family that was really critical and judgmental. And we had to be happy all the time. You couldn't be sad, you couldn't be angry, you just had to be happy, happy. And there was a lot of pressure to perform. There were high expectations of me. And so I was really focused on being a perfectionist, having to do everything right. And so my journey also started in my youth. So around 12 years old, um, I had an experience where I was packing my lunch and packing some cookies in my lunch bag. And my mom said, maybe you should only take one cookie. And that kind of just flipped a switch for me. And all of a sudden, I started limiting my calories. I would only eat like carrots and celery. And just to get a sense of my thinking, I would eat from the large end of the carrot to the small end just to reflect that I was getting thinner. My exercise increased. I was doing more and more exercise each day. It was kind of like compulsive. It felt like I had to. I was also compulsive in other ways, just everything had to be so clean and perfect. I would vacuum in straight lines, and then my shoes in the closet, their laces would be straight and parallel. So I just had everything to be in order. And this showed that my issue is that if I felt like I didn't have a sense of control in my life, and this was my anxiety, and so I was doing these different things to have a sense of control. So I didn't have a lot of friends in high school. I just kind of got through it. And then, no, I'm not done with high school yet. So actually, my family had been saving up a lot of money and pennies to go to a family trip to Europe. And uh, I'd been seeing a psychiatrist who said, the only way you should take Robin is, if you make sure she stays above a certain weight. And so that was 70 pounds. And believe it or not, we actually traveled. They took a bathroom scale with them, and we ended up going to Europe and renting a VW van and camping. And every morning was a crisis because I had to weigh in and make sure that I was above the 70 pounds so that I could stay. And I got a little sneaky at times. Try would manipulate my weight by standing on the scale a certain way, or one time I wore my dad's belt and stuffed bananas in it so that I'd weigh more and still make my weight. So I am pretty impish throughout this story, and was my way of, trying to get away with things and break rules. That also gave me a sense of control. So what ended up happening, I eventually did dip under 70 pounds. So my parents sent me back to the US with my brother, and they stayed because they were pretty much over uh, overwhelmed having trying to deal with me. And my brother admitted me to Kaiser, and they had no idea what to do with me as a person with anorexia. This was back in the day when anorexia was just getting known, um, and they really didn't know how to treat it. So Kaiser didn't know what to do with me. They were pretty much putting me on an IV with nutrition. And I would just try and get away with things like taking the IV bag and dumping it in the toilet, and then, sneaking out and going on the stairs and running the stairs. But, after a while, they just didn't know how to treat me. So um, my parents got home, and so it ended up getting worse. And I just was not eating and losing a lot of weight. And so they called the cops. And so the cops ended up picking me up, putting me in handcuffs in the back of the car, and taking me to Northridge Hospital. And it just felt, really, you're taken out of the life that you know and everything you know and put in this strange environment. And everything that gives you comfort is no longer around. So it's just a very disorienting experience. And they placed me at first in a seclusion room with cameras. And my way of taking back control was, doing jumping jacks while I was in there because I was determined to keep losing weight. At one point, they gave me some medications without my knowing, and my parents didn't even know. And I had a really bad reaction. So they really did that. That was not, that went against my parents' wishes, that went against my wishes. So that shouldn't have happened. So after 3 months, the insurance ran out, and I had to go home for a few weeks until the new year. And that was a disaster because my parents didn't really know how to deal with me not eating and exercising. So then I ended up going to Woodview Calabasas Psychiatric Hospital. And again, it was really disorienting. They take your shoes when you first get there, so you're not a flight risk. Locked doors, bars on the windows, nothing to do. So I was just pacing the halls. And again, they didn't really know how to treat anorexia. Um, their main thing was just trying to keep me alive physically. And that was one of the reasons why the treatment wasn't helpful because they weren't dealing with me as a whole person and with my emotions. They were just dealing with my physical being. So I was there for 9 months. Just to give you an idea of what the being in the facility was like. I mean, my roommate was a 90-year-old woman who wore a wastebasket on her head. Um, you know, they since I refused to eat, they would have like five different staff members come tackle me in the hallway and stuff me into a straitjacket and then strap me to a bed and tube feed me. And so it was really scary, just the sense that they had total control and could put anything they wanted in my body, and I had no control over it. But again, my way of taking back control, I managed to get out of that straitjacket, and that was my claim to fame. And I kind of held my head high as I walked by the nurses' station, and they were all really shocked. So again, my way of trying to take back control. In the facility, there's no privacy. Someone is in the bathroom with you, and when you're trying to go to the bathroom, one of the staff members got into my personal journal, so that felt very invasive. The doctor avoided me and wouldn't talk to me. And, things would change, and the staff would just say, "Oh, doctor's orders. Now you have to eat more calories," and change constantly. And I had no idea about having any rights as far as being able to talk to the doctor. I didn't know about a patient's rights advocate either. Um, and so I felt I had no control over my body or my life because I was had no independence. I was being locked up and I couldn't go where I wanted. So again, my way of taking control, they were trying to get me to gain weight. I would hide my foods that without them knowing it. So they would give me cans of Ensure, and I would sit on the ground and pour it behind the couch when they weren't looking. Or when I finally started eating real food, they would sit there next to me, eagle-eyeing everything I ate. But I would manage to put some slices of American cheese under each of the dining room chairs that they didn't know about. So I'm sure when they found those years later, they were probably all like hard as a rock. So anyhow, I'm giving you a lot of details about life in the facility just to give you a sense of what it was like. Um, I was able to exercise, and I had this large punching bag, and I just envisioned my doctor's face on it because I was so mad at him. I was pretty isolated from other teens because we didn't really relate to each other. They were all foster kids. Hang on just a sec. My dogs are having a little shouting match for just a second. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. So anyhow, I felt really isolated. They would take us on some field trips, like we went to the park, and then one time they took us to Malibu Beach, but it was really quite an experience because, a bunch of teenagers filed into this white van, and it had stamped on the side Woodview Calabasas Psychiatric Hospital on the side. So of course we were really, low, down low, and nobody knew about where we were coming from. And so they gave us all these standard issue towels, set of beach towels that you get from the hospital, those white little rectangular towels with a blue stripe down the middle. So you didn't feel like you really fit in and you really stood out, and it was like really kind of humiliating. As far as school, while I was in the facility, I got some tutoring, but since I was there for the whole year, I missed ninth grade, but I was able to graduate and go into high school. And I was ashamed to kind of tell anybody what happened, so I just told them I'd been to private school for a year. Um, but what changed for me when I was in that hospital was I had this epiphany. At one point, I was standing in the room, and I just realized that if I didn't change my behavior and start doing what they wanted me to do, I would be in there forever for the rest of my life. So I realized I had to start eating, I had to start gaining weight, or I was gonna, be stuck there. And so I felt like I was a sellout because I was, letting go of my beliefs and mission that, I had unusual thinking at the time that I needed to be pure, that I didn't shouldn't need anybody, and that I should feel the most pain of anybody in the world. So I just had these different beliefs going on. So it just felt like I wasn't me because I just wanted to get out of the hospital. But when I started, changing and starting to eat, the staff became friends with me and they were really supportive and they acknowledged me as a whole person. And so I started getting better and I ended up, getting to 100 pounds and got discharged. One of my staff members, her boyfriend had a Harley. So I felt like it was another coup when I got to ride home on his Harley. So I got back home and I was trying to gain weight and I didn't learn to eat right. So I'd eat pints of Haagen-Dazs just to try and keep my weight up. And I was still a perfectionist, a straight A student, and then I kind of had a meltdown when I got a B in one of the classes. So finally, I graduated high school and I moved away to San Diego to go to UC San Diego for college. And it was good for me to get away from my family. And at that time, I kind of just shunned perfectionism. I went to the other end of the scale and I socialized as much as I could, joined as many clubs as I could, and studied as little as possible just to pass the tests. So this was my first point of showing more mania and more mood swings. I was only able to do part-time jobs at the time because it was just, too much stress. So I was a lifeguard for a while and a recreation assistant, but I always worked part-time throughout school. Then for my junior year, I went abroad to France. And again, it was helpful to get away from my family. that family dynamic. And I was pretty hyped and met this woman, and I had gotten my first relationship. Everything was in French, so there wasn't stigma attached to anything. But I was really hyped about that. But then I'd have mood swings, and then I got really, really depressed. And then by the end of the year, I wanted to stay with my girlfriend, but I couldn't because I didn't have a work visa and I couldn't legally stay in France. So I ended up moving to Garmisch in Germany because my parents and my brother all lived in Germany at the time. And I got a job as a recreation assistant on the recreation base for the military as a civilian. Didn't know anyone. And I was still trying to keep in touch with my girlfriend in France, being, just kind of unrealistic and grandiose about thinking that we'd still get back together. But our plans fell through. We had thought we'd, uh, get together, and it didn't happen. So after being depressed again, I went to return back to the States. My parents thought I would never return. But I kind of knew I'd go back and finish college. So um, when I got back, I had a job as a resident advisor at the International House at the college. And um, I was about ready to graduate, and my plans fell through because I had made these, you know, uh, grandiose plans to meet with my French girlfriend on an island off Tunisia. And I had a phone call with her, and it all fell through. So again, I got into a deep depression. I stopped going to classes. I stopped doing my work. And luckily, the resident dean took me in and just said, I can keep my job if I continue going to counseling. But then ended up going to a psychiatrist because I was having a really hard time. I didn't know her or anything. And I sat in the room with her, and she had the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, the Psychology Bible, in her lap, and she was literally thumbing through the pages looking for a diagnosis to put on me. So that was the first time I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 27 years old. So I was having these mood swings throughout life, but it didn't get identified as bipolar disorder until later. So when I did graduate, I didn't know what to do with myself. And, I didn't think I could have a full-time job, so I knew how to do school. So I went to grad school. And my parents were no longer supporting me, so I got on SSI and Medi-Cal to help support myself through grad school. And I kept part-time jobs throughout. And again, I needed something that was low stress, because school was on my own schedule, but jobs, I worked at a pharmacy for 20 minutes as a cashier, but it was too stressful dealing with people and money. I worked at a ski shop, and every 15 minutes I hid in the storeroom because I couldn't deal with the people. And then I finally found a low stress job as a recreation assistant working at the parks and kept that job for 10 years. So in graduate school, we're all studying psychology, and these were all budding therapists who were my colleagues. And I made a point of being very out and about and open about the fact that I was a peer and had a mental health disability because I wanted them to know that, they could be in either chair, the client chair or the therapist chair, just like any of us. And I wanted to prove that we could do anything just like they could. So that was the time when I got manic again. So during that time, I started working with a private therapist who referred me to a psychiatrist. Um, and I got really depressed again, and I was really reluctant to take medications because I felt that would be weak, and I felt like I ought to be able to treat it with, I ought to be able to do yoga or holistic medicine and be able to control my mood swings. But I went voluntarily into a hospital with my psychiatrist who was monitoring my meds at the time. And it was still really traumatic for me because the past experience being, held involuntarily in the hospital as a teen, I just kept worrying that I wasn't going to be let out. But after 3 weeks, I was able to get out. They found a medication cocktail that works for me. I'm actually still on it after all these years. Luckily, I have no side effects. I've tried to stop many times, but the symptoms come back, and so it's just a matter of quality of life. And then after I graduated from grad school, I got my first full-time job doing psychological research, and was doing a study interviewing peers at clubhouses to see if the clubhouses were helpful for them. And I met this woman who knew about an opening at DRC, which was PAI at the time, or Protection and Advocacy. And the job, the minimum qualification was to be a person with lived experience with mental health disabilities. And I'm like, score, it's like, cool, I can do that. And I could be out about my, disability and everything and didn't have to worry about it. So it was like perfect job for me. And now here I am. I haven't talked a lot about my recovery. I took you through a lot of the trauma, but just to show you now, here I am. I've kept the full-time job. It's now over 23 years. I got married. My wife is actually even more important to my recovery than my medications. I have a family with fur babies. I have a roof over my head. I'm no longer on SSI or Medi-Cal. We go on vacations. I have fewer mood swings. Once in a while I have breakthroughs and take a medication just to help me out. But I made it through, so there's hope for all of us, I think. It's just that we have different journeys, different paths along the way. But as long as, you keep hope is what we've got. That's what we've got to hang on to. So as long as you keep your hope, that's what can keep you going. And we can all recover. So I just want everybody to know that. So thank you for hearing my story.
Thank you, panelists, Jesse, Aurelia, Robin. Thank you for your insightful stories and sharing these stories of hope with us. We're so grateful that you were able to join us today. And this is just really, moments of reflection to reflect on, just each one of our paths, as you mentioned, Robin, and each one of you shared. It was so different. Yet you also shared about some of the great things you're currently doing. Is there any particular messages of hope that you'd like to share with our participants or a quote that keeps you inspired? Would you like to share?
I have a quote that has seen me through some dark days. And I first saw this quote when I was a teaching artist with the San Francisco Shakespeare Company, and that was actually the same year that I started experiencing a mental health episode. So I kind of held on to that. But the quote is by Arthur Ashe, and it is, "Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can." That one means a lot to me.
Powerful, Jesse. Thank you for sharing.
I wanted to share something. I just wanted to encourage everyone to, our attendees that are participating today to remember that there's light at the end of the tunnel, to keep moving forward, even if it's baby steps. You're going to be fine. And just know that you have support out there. There's many resources. Don't be afraid to reach out when you're in need, and know that people do listen and people do care. So that's something that I wanted to share, because for myself included, I never reached out. So that's why I encourage others to do so and know that there is help, and just to stay hopeful, and just, like I said, baby steps. It'll be okay.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. I'll just say that, you know, baby steps are really important. And it's, times when you're really, really depressed, I had to make a list of some of the things that I thought brought me joy. And they were the littlest things. I mean, like I liked hearing my dog eat kibble. I liked, the sound of my medication containers, the closing when I flipped them. So just these little things that gave me joy. And it was so important just to get me through the depression. And I also just want to say, I think there was a point I reached when I stopped fighting the depression. And, I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't started medications. And I came to a point where I had to accept my situation and my mental health disability. And that's what helped me get on my road to recovery because I stopped fighting. I kind of, learned from Beth, you kind of take it, it is what it is. Life is what happens, and you can just, respond to it, and you choose how you respond to it. And you just kind of deal with everything as it comes, like every step, each step as it comes, like Leah said. So I think with the support you have, it's really important to have a strong support system. So if you have friends, family, if you're in therapy, anything that can give you help. And again, self-care. Lee and I always talk about how important self-care is. So if you're having a hard time, it's really important to step back and do something for yourself to take care of yourself. So I just think, everybody has it in them, and it's a matter of finding our own way, and everybody's recovery journey looks different. So it's unique to you, and you're the only one who can can decide and choose what that journey will look like. So that's what all I want to share. Thank you.